My Little Pony Generation 5, a new generation, whatever you want to call it. All of these names for it are just whatever, but it's just overall been a bit of a big disappointment for myself. There is some redeeming qualities for it, and I have tried to write down a list of Gen 5 positives, but the list was only like 2 lines long, so we're going to go over all the negatives, and then over time, perhaps even during this video, I might come up with more positives for Generation 5. But for now, let's talk about a few things that I personally think were huge negatives or huge disappointments for My Little Pony Generation 5. Now, this list isn't in any particular order. They're not in order of, like, number 1 is the most disappointing and number 8 is, like, the least disappointing or whatever. But let's go ahead and start with the list with number 1, Pip's Strange Wings, which a lot of people after the movie thought, like, oh crap, like, Pip's wings are extremely different than every other Pegasus's wings. Is that going to mean something later on in the series? Is that going to be, like, a deformity type thing? Is she not going to be as strong of a flyer or something like that? I had even personally pointed out that in the ending scene, it didn't look like she could fly as well as Zip or some of the other Pegasus, and so maybe that was going to be a plot point at some point in the series, and that could have been a fun little thing where they kind of just talked a little bit about disabilities in a way, you know, not exactly a disability, but a disability in the sense of, like, how they did with Scootaloo. Her disability or whatever was that they were a terrible flyer. They couldn't fly. They could have done something similar with Pip, or even had something else along with it. Maybe her father was someone else, and ooh, that would have been wacky. Zip and Pip have different fathers, and that's why her wings are extremely different or something. But no, before the series came out, or I think like after the first episode, they had come out and was like, hey, it's actually inspired by this random singer that wore wings during one of the performances or something. And that was just a huge disappointment because there was definitely a use case for this. They definitely could have used that somewhere. But that on the flip side, I was talking about how her wings are very different from everyone else's. That is a Generation 5 positive, where the designs and the diversity and the designs were pretty unique and interesting and kind of cool. I liked how, you know, there was so many different hairstyles we got to see. There's a couple of different body types that we got to see. It wasn't just the same model character, just repainted different colors and stuff like that. So it was pretty cool to see. But Pip's Strange Wings meant absolutely nothing. It was just a design choice and nothing else. And personally, for me, that was a disappointment. Now, number 2, I had to throw this on the list. The Generation 4 lore and its uses, the way they used Generation 4 lore in this series was just such a huge disappointment. Apparently, we ended up finding out a handful of months ago, or like right before the last chapter or something like that, that what happened was that Generation 5 didn't quite have all the rights to the Generation 4 lore, so they were using it very sparingly, and that is why there is inconsistencies with all kinds of other things, and why they just straight up ignored other things. But honestly, it was such a huge disappointment. I personally would have just been just as happy or even happier if they just said, hey, we don't have the rights to Generation 4 stuff, so let's just not use it in Generation 4 stuff and just create a new series. They could have easily done that, and honestly, I don't think the series would have been that much different. It just felt like Generation 4 lore just didn't really even have a place in Generation 5, and we know why, but I'm also curious as to why they even used it in the first place. They definitely should have done something completely different with it, or just nothing at all with it. Number 3 is Opaline. I want to talk about other characters too, but I want to talk about specifically Opaline because her character arc and her story and everything like that was such a huge disappointment because it's an alicorn we never got to see. She talks about this place where she came from, Skyros or whatever. We have no idea what the hell that is because it was never mentioned in Generation 4. It's not mentioned ever again in Generation 5. Her backstory changes like 2 or 3 times throughout the series. Once she says she was in Skyros and she was already an alicorn, and Celestia and Luna were like, hey, we don't like you. We're not gonna be friends with you. And so she was like, oh, I'm gonna be evil then. And towards the end of the series, in like the last episode or whatever, she gives a completely different backstory. And it's like, okay, well, which one is true? What's going on here? I guess technically you told the first one to Misty, and maybe you're just trying to lie to her so that you can manipulate her a little bit more. But now at the end, you're changing it again. So what is the real story? Who knows? But overall, her story and everything like that is just completely all over the place. She's a terrible villain. Really dumb. Dumb as rocks, I would say. Well, maybe not as rocks, but really dumb. And just a little bit annoying as well. Just there's so many things about Opaline that just are a big disappointment for me, and that leads me into the dragons, which were also another big disappointment. First off, the dragons don't even look like dragons. They look like they mated with like ponies or something, and like 7 generations later, this is what they became because they just started mating with dragons and ponies or whatever. And so that's just what we have. We have a weird dragon pony thing. And again, they had such good design diversity in the ponies and stuff like that. They could have done that with the dragons too, but no, all the dragons have the same body type, but different colors and like maybe one other little thing like hair for some reason. I don't know why they have hair. That was a little bit of a weird thing. I guess, did one of the dragons have hair in Generation 4? Now that I'm thinking about it, one of them might have, but it just overall looks weird. And besides the design and everything like that, I can look past that because, you know, I watch Lego Ninjago. I can watch Legos fight each other and be like, that looks cool. So I can get over the design part as long as you're telling me a good story and doing cool things with the characters and stuff like that. But the dragons were such a huge disappointment. What was going on with them? It seemed like their lore changed 2 or 3 times. And it was just such a horrible thing. It goes back to Twilight's plan and everything like that, which is kind of another thing on this list, is that Twilight's plan overall was just such a huge disappointment. And it was like, okay, we know that Twilight had to do this thing where she split magic into 3 things because of something super important and powerful and dangerous, because of Opaline or something like that. But then you get to learn more about it, and like at the end of the series, you're just like, okay, why the fuck did she do that? That was the dumbest plan possible. No one else argued that it was a dumb plan, and she basically just, I want to say she committed genocide, but she committed more of like an amnesia genocide, if that makes sense, because she just put all the dragons to sleep for no reason. Like, they had no reason to go into sleep, whatever. Opaline was going to try to steal their dragon fire or whatever, so she took all of the dragon fire and put it into one thing instead of leaving it split between, you know, the entire population, making it much more difficult to acquire. It's like a puzzle. It's like a puzzle. You put together the puzzle, all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, and it's all in one place. So you can glue it all together and pick it up and just take it away or something like that, right? But if it's all individual jigsaw pieces, it's much more difficult to acquire all the pieces and put them together. That is essentially, I think, a perfect example of like what Twilight basically did. She was like, I have all these jigsaw puzzles and they're scattered around the world. You know, most of them are in the same place, but a few of them, you know, go to wherever, you know, like for Spike, for example, he lives basically everywhere. I imagine by this time they probably are living all over the place. But the point is, she has these pieces scattered all over the place, and her idea is, let me put all the pieces in one place and also combine them into one single piece so that it is harder to get somehow. That doesn't make any sense. And I don't know, just the plan for that is really dumb. Everything they did with the dragons were just completely dumb. Sparky is annoying as shit. Spike was done really weird. To get him out of here with that voice. Cast a different person for Spike, I guess. But just every single decision they made with the dragons were just a bad decision, in my opinion. It's everything from the design to the casting choices for the voices and stuff like that, the history behind them, the lore behind them. The only thing that I think was kind of cool about the dragons was the dragon fire magic, which, if you guys remember, in Generation 4, Spike did kind of have this weird dragon fire magic that never really got explained. He was the only dragon that could do it, so it stands to reason that, you know, 1,000 years later, or thousands of years later, however many years it's been since Generation 4, it stands to reason that the dragons would be able to do that. Like, all of the dragons, or most of the dragons, would have some kind of unique power that they could get out of their dragon breath, and I think that was really cool. But again, they introduced it, and then they just didn't really even do anything with it, so it was like, okay, well, maybe just shut up. maybe just shut up and just, let's pretend it never happened. Back to the Opaline thing, I said I want to talk about a little bit of the other characters too, and I want to talk about all of them, because honestly, every single character was a big disappointment. The only 2 characters I can say that weren't a big disappointment to me was Zip and Misty. Zip and Misty are basically the main characters of the series. They're basically the characters that we're following. Sunny, the supposed main character, and like, I guess their chosen one, if you want to go that route, because she became the Alicorn or whatever, so you could go she's the chosen one kind of route. But anyway, she's this almighty Alicorn, and there's this whole mystery around her Alicorn powers, and she's trying to bring friendship back to the world, and she has all these goals and stuff like that, but she doesn't actually do anything. The entire series, she does basically nothing. She leads a couple of things to be added to, you know, Maritime Bay, like the community garden and stuff like that, but it's not really working towards their goals of like bringing friendship together and figuring out what happened to Twilight and what happened to Magic and what Opaline's plans are, because she knows Opaline exists. She might not know exactly her name or exactly all of her motives, but she knows this evil alicorn exists, and that evil alicorn wants to steal all magic and keep friendship away from the world, and she does absolutely nothing. Instead, Zip does everything. She does all the investigating. She finds the clues. She figures out that Misty is working for Opaline. Well, kind of, but not really. Like, she knows that Misty knows more than what she's saying. All this kind of stuff. She figures out everything on her own, and she's the only one actively trying to do something about what's going on. And then anytime some magical mystery thing happens, she's, again, the only one that tries to figure out what's happening and try to fix it. Like, in the instance of one of the early episodes where Hitch and Sunny swap cutie marks or whatever else like that, they just continue to kind of like bicker and pretend to do each other's jobs and stuff like that. Meanwhile, Zip is like, oh crap, what the hell happened here? And then she goes to try to figure it out, and she's the only one actively trying to fix the situation they just put themselves in. So it's weird in that sense too. Zip actually is actively doing things. I would say she has more of a character arc than Sunny, Hitch, or literally any of the other characters besides maybe Misty, which again, Misty is the only other character that did anything useful. She was actively doing stuff. They did a couple things that were really disappointing to Misty, like she tried to get the lantern, she successfully got the lantern, and then instead of going straight back to Opaline with it, she just buried it in the garden for some reason. A couple of weird things like that, but otherwise Misty was honestly a perfect character. They did her justice, I think. And we're kind of following her story more so than we're following Sunny's, because she's captive by Opaline, and we're trying to watch this redemption arc, and I think the redemption arc for her is done quite well. But every other character just does nothing. They just do like one basic thing for each episode, and that's it. So yeah, the characters, just big disappointment there. And of course, in general, the writing is just horrible across the board, especially the last few episodes where they contradicted themselves like 6 or 7 times within the span of, 30 minutes. So it's like, okay, you guys need to do a second draft, right? You guys know that second drafts exist, right? Take a look at what you just wrote, the whole script, and then read it, and then be like, hang on, this right here, we said this happened. And then 2 minutes later, we said this happened instead. So which one is it, guys? I guess the people in the writing room were just like, I don't know, just leave them both in. We don't have enough time. I don't know what happened there. Maybe I want to say it has something to do with the writer's strike, but I honestly don't think that the timeline lines up quite right for the writer's strike to have affected that. But just the writing in general is just so bad. There's so many contradictions, and that goes through basically everything in this list. Pip's strange wings meaning nothing. That's bad writing, I think, because they could have done something cool there. But it's not the worst writing. It's not really that bad because, maybe they just didn't want to do anything with it and it's just a design choice. That's fine. Generation 4 lore and uses behind it, like how they use that, I would consider that bad writing. Even though they had limitations on what they could use from Generation 4, I still think that it has bad writing because they could have just opted to not really use any of that Generation 4 lore, or they could have opted to go really in depth on a specific topic or something like that in Generation 4 lore. With the dragons and literally everything they did with them, bad writing. Every character being horrible besides Zip and Misty, bad writing. And just in general, bad writing all across the board. The animation and the style, I guess, depending on how you feel about, CGI and stuff like that, maybe it's fine. But the style of the show, I gotta be honest with you, is not super great. But, and I've personally seen a few animation errors throughout the series, which is kind of mind-boggling to me a little bit because it's like, I don't know, it was harder to notice that stuff in like Generation 4 or in general when you're watching a TV show. You don't really notice the animation errors on your first watch, but usually when there was an animation error there was a couple of like very blatant animation errors in like the first handful of episodes that I noticed immediately, and so that's not super great. And the style of the show, it took me forever to kind of figure out how to explain what the show looks like, but all the characters, of course, are CG animated. All the horses and other characters and stuff like that are CG animated, but all of the items look like they were handmade, like they were made, like crafted, like plastic, like crafted plastic that they just placed down onto a table. That's how the backgrounds look. That's how all the props look. All the props and items and anything that isn't a character looks like a piece of plastic sitting on a table, and then the characters are animated into that setting. That's what it looks like, and I don't know why it looks like that. It just does, and personally, that style just, it throws me off because it doesn't feel like they're anywhere. It always feels like they're in the same place, even when they're in vastly different places. It's just really weird to me. And I don't know why they went that route. Maybe because it's more close to how the toys are going to look, because the toys are, of course, plastic. So maybe that's what they were going for there. But finally, I think there was a little bit of a lack of singing and songs and stuff in this series versus Generation 4. It seemed like every other episode they were singing, and almost all of them were a bop. Daniel Ingram did an amazing job on Generation 4 with the songs and stuff like that. But of course, he didn't carry over to Generation 5, and so you have this other guy writing songs and music and stuff like that, and not all of them are really great. There's a few bangers, but overall, I think the singing and the song choices and things like that just weren't done as well, or not as much as Generation 4 did, or as much as Generation 5 should have done or could have done. But these are 8 random things that I find personally very disappointing about Generation 5. Let me know what you guys think is personally disappointing about Generation 5, and what you guys think is super positive about Generation 5, because I'm going to be honest with you guys, my list of Generation 5 positives is the character design and diversity, and then just like Zip and Misty, I guess, because they were done really well and I like them. So that's pretty much it for my list of positives for Generation 5. So if you guys have anything else for Generation 5 positives, please let me know. What do you guys love about this show? I think one thing that it does is it gets you intrigued just enough to watch the next episode, and then you're disappointed by the next episode, but you're like, well, I've gone this far and I want to see what's happening. Like, I want to see where Misty ends up and where Opaline ends up and how they resolve all this, all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to watch the next episode and keep going just to watch all the way through. And that's pretty much the thing that was going through my mind watching this, but I'm rambling now, so I'm gonna let you guys go. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please do consider liking, subscribing, sharing, and doing all of those wonderful things like that, because when you do wonderful things like that, not only do you get access to wonderful content such as this, but you also get to become wonderful yourself, and I think we all want that. So do those wonderful things, and until next time, stay wonderful.